Good evening. It's Tuesday, the 9th of December 2014. This evening we have another one of the objectives from the VCP-NV exam, this week being given by or presented by Lawrence Kohan, who I believe works for EMC, if I remember looking him up earlier. So he's going to go through Objective 8, which covers off a lot of the NSX functionality around automation, backup, management, an interesting variety of topics anyway. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass you over, and Lawrence, all yours.
Great, thanks a lot. Hi everybody, this is Lawrence Kohan. So yeah, we're doing Objective 8. Bear with me, I'm actually in the EMC office right now and there's funny VPN stuff going on. So I've actually remoted into my home lab so that I can show you some demos of what we're talking about. So quickly about me, I actually just recently passed the VCIX-NV. I actually bypassed the VCP-NV entirely, so I've never had to take it. I'll never have to take it. So bear with me, I've never seen it, so unfortunately I can't really give you any idea as to what you're in for on that end. But I went through the objectives so I can give you some info on what they're asking for. Other than that, I have, as you can see, I have some other certifications. I'm an advisory solutions architect at EMC. I don't have a blog, hopefully someday, and you can find me on Twitter. Okay, so Section 8. What they're looking for, this really deals with user management and logging and various things of that nature. So in Objective 8.1, and forgive me if I move a little quickly, there's actually quite a lot to cover, so I'm just going to try to touch upon all of it. So in Objective 8.1, there's roles, permissions, and the whole user setup. So what they're going to ask you to do is to identify the default roles. I'll show you a sample of that in a second. Integrating NSX with SSO. It says explain integration. You know, very quickly, it's the same as any other VMware solution that integrates with SSO. You know, you use NTP to make sure that the item and the SSO server are in time sync. Then you enter the credentials of SSO, and there you go. And of course, SSO gives you the ability to use any vCenter permissions in conjunction with whatever the solution is. In this case, it's NSX. So once you've assigned SSO, you can then access the vCenter server users and groups and assign those guys permissions in NSX accordingly. Configure SSO, we just said, enable and disable user count, edit and delete user count. So let's go over this quickly. So for this one, we're signed into the web browser, and you go to the main screen. Forgive me if the performance isn't that good. I'm actually in San Francisco and my home lab is in New York. So you go to Network and Security, and you go to the manager. And the instance that you're looking at. And in the Manage tab, here you go to Users. Now, by default, NSX creates an admin user. The default password is VMware or whatever you assign during the installation of the NSX manager. You can't modify that user unless you're doing CLI. You can do some things, but other than that, the admin user is the original user of the system. From there, you can use your vCenter binding to add users and roles accordingly. So the first part of the objective was, what are the roles? So you pick a user account. Rather than go through the process here, I'll just go to the one that I've already added. And from there, you'd give it 4 different roles. You have Enterprise Administrator, which means it can do absolutely everything in NSX. NSX Administrator, which means you have administration capability over NSX, but not security features. So for example, you can manage existing port groups that are there, but you cannot create new ones. Security is kind of the opposite of that, where you can do security functions like creating firewall rules. You can create port groups and assign security elements in NSX. An auditor is really a read-only access, so you'd give it to maybe a high-level manager who can hop into NSX and just kind of, make sure that things are the way that they're supposed to be, but that user doesn't have the ability to change any. Now, on the next screen, if you've assigned, by the way, if you've assigned Enterprise Administrator, that it's implied that you have full access, so you don't limit the scope of that. And if your administrator access, this would be grayed out. You wouldn't have the option to do anything. But if you've done an auditor or a lesser percentage, you can either say you have access to my entire NSX environment, or you can limit the scope to certain logical switches or resource pools accordingly. So here you could tie down your access, finish it, and that's how you would add a user and the role accordingly. And then you log in and test it out. Now, the important thing to know is that each user can only have one role. You can create a user and assign him a role, and at any time you can change the role, but you can't give him more than one role. So that's pretty much a rundown of 8.1. That's pretty easy to go. And I won't delete the user, but I'll show you how you can. So if the user is highlighted, if you press the Ghostbuster symbol, that disables the user. And if the user is disabled, you can press the checkbox to re-enable it. So this guy is disabled, checkbox re-enables. And the X, pretty self-explanatory, that would delete the user. So, okay, so that's objective 8.1. Oh, and I'll show you where you set up SSO. That's actually done you log into the NSX appliance itself. Now, for those of you who are familiar with vShield, even though people don't like me saying this, but honestly, the way I see it, NSX Manager is a very souped-up version of the old vShield Manager. The first time I logged into NSX Manager, I noticed a lot of similarity. So if you know your way around vShield Manager, the first time you hop into NSX Manager, certain things will look very familiar to you.
Yeah, not wanting to get ahead of you,
here,
but the API is very similar, isn't it, as well?
Yes, that is correct. I mean, a lot of the functions that you will do in NSX Manager, your initial setup is very similar to vShield Manager. As a matter of fact, if you look at the defaults, self-sign certs and all, some of them still say vShield. So you can tell it's kind of like they took it and then like really souped up the code.
Yep.
So from here, from this, when you first log in, you see these, and here's where you can do some basic tasks. Some of these other things we'll get to. And I've actually run an upgrade on this. It went pretty smooth. So you first set up your vSphere registration. There's nothing really surprising about this. Whatever your vCenter is, you put in your lookup service here, your vCenter server, wait for it to authenticate. As it does, you're now connected, and there's your SSO integration that allows you to tie into that vCenter. So for A1, that's it. We'll come back to this for the other stuff. So 8.2, describe NSX automation. API functionality. So the same concept here if you've done vShield API. I'm not really an expert on API themselves. Some of you might have your own tools and such. Just for the purposes of this lab, I pulled down the one of the Firefox plugins just to show you this. You would put in, actually, I was in a rush to set this up. I didn't fully finish this. But for those of you who are familiar, you'd use the URL of your NSX manager with that URL. You'd have to set up your key to get authentication, and from there, once you're logged in, you could then run your commands. And again, this is really the same as vShield Manager and anything else. Sorry I didn't have a chance to fully finish this, so let's move on for now. What I'll try to do is maybe do some examples on my own and then hopefully add them to this video. For those of you who want to see examples, I believe that Chris Wall has some up on his blog of just some quick, here's how to do it. So that's actually a very useful site if you go to wallnetwork.com and take a look at his series on NSX. And that's really, once you set it up, it's how do you send commands, how do you get, how can you modify, and so forth. let's move on to the next objective, monitoring a NSX implementation. So there's a lot of stuff here. There's different tools. You can either use CLI, again, you can use the API that we just spoke about, the UI here. Before you can monitor anything, when you first set up your environment, you'll see with a lot of different features, when you enable them, it'll ask you if you want to enable logging. So at the time, check that box, and then it'll start collecting stats so that you can look at logs later or look at the dashboards and so forth. So inbound, outbound, and I have a very basic environment, so there's not much to see in my lab. I just want to kind of show you where everything is. Data collection, perform virtual machine activity monitoring. Let's see if I have this stuff set up. Oh, and you can also monitor in vCops as well. I actually have vCops in my environment, but to make sure that performance wasn't too bad for today, I turned vCops off because it's a resource hog. Okay, so after you do your initial setup of NSX, which is done here, NSX Manager, for the most part, almost everything else you're going to do is through the web client. So you go back to this main screen here, and as you set up services, if you look at flow monitoring, for example, you'll see in a lot of places where you'll have collections that are by default disabled, so you just want to make sure you turn them on. And whenever you press a button, for those of you who are familiar with just GUI firewalls, let's see, I'll disable this and then turn it on again. Well, in that case, it didn't ask me, but there are other screens where when you enable it, you'll see a bar at the top saying, do you want to apply these changes? Then you click yes, and it'll save it for you. If not, when you exit out, it won't do the thing that you've asked it to do. So first thing is to make sure your collector is good. I can really hope I didn't erase my stats by doing that, but we'll see. Then we look at the dashboard. Yeah, good. So you see the stats here. And we'll show you top destinations and top sources. And in a real environment, this will be useful. My environment doesn't have much to show. But, okay, yeah, so the things I've set up are there. And here's where you would look for your details by services if you want to see what's allowed and blocked. And these are just the different places that you can look. I mean, in my environment, there's not much to show there. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have examples of these. But there's that. And then in activity monitoring, same thing. Here's where you would look at it. It was saying in one of those bullet points was how to look at inbound and outbound. You see those here. I haven't tagged any VMs to monitor, but again, you would do all that in these screens. Right, and again, make sure it's enabled. It's kind of going off the screen here, but you press this button here, which you may not be able to see. Okay. Objective 8.4, auditing and compliance. Okay, so as we said, as you deploy services in NSX, many of them give you the ability to enable logs. And at the time that you deploy, you turn that on so that you can then later either pull logs from various systems, send them to syslog in the case of NSX Manager, and report against them later on. And if you look at the NSX administration guide, which I don't think I have on my local machine, there's actually entire sections of different compliance examples and what you would need to do to meet those. So flow monitoring, I just showed you that before. As you run and create firewall rules, it asks you at the time if you want them to be monitored or if you want to look against them to see stats on them. There's also a question in the objectives about how to export and import configurations. You can do that from here. I'll show you the DB switch in one of them. And all of these stats, again, through your activity monitoring, you can, if you set up your collection to look at the activity based on a firewall rule, you're going to see all of that stuff through here. Okay, so let's go back to NSX Manager. Actually, let me just take a look at A5 for a second. Okay. All right, so I'll show you where you can find this stuff. When you're first setting up NSX and you deploy your edges and other components, in this example, what the objective wants to show are the various edge services. If you're new to the NSX console within the web client, this part is not exactly intuitive. You would click on the edge appliance that you want to see info on and double click it to open that up. So now this goes into that instance of that edge. And if you see all these subtasks, these are all the different functions that the edge will serve up, like the firewall, DHCP, NAT routing, and so forth. And as you go through each service, as you see by default, stuff would be disabled. You would turn on that ability to do that function. And in most instances, there will be the option to enable logging. So you enable service. In this case, DHCP is turned off, but you can enable logging. And in this case, there isn't one. I think the load balancer also has the ability to log. Here as well, different routing protocols you would have to go through and enable each one individually that you want to use, and logging as well. In this particular case, logging is not enabled. So I'd say edit it and enable logging, and I could choose the level of logging I would want. I'll leave it at info. And it didn't work, but that's how it should work. It may not have worked with load balancer because I don't think I'm using that. Here's an example of when I don't want to turn the VPN on, but you would click enable there to enable that service. Logging policy. Some of these things it's probably not going to let me enable for you because I'm not using them. But again, I'm just kind of taking you through the menus to see where you would do these things. Yeah. So as you can see, you enable logging for the firewall, for the VPN, for DHCP, and that's where you would turn all of those functions on so that you can pull the logs. Another one of the objectives is to download the tech support logs. So you're in the instance of the edge, you go to Actions, and you do this right here. And again, you'll see most VMware appliances, if you go into the 5480 management port, you'll see most of the administration options are very similar. You know, you'd set your NTP there, you could generate a bundle like this and pull it down. So in this objective now, like I said, unfortunately, I don't know what the test looks like. I've never taken it. I don't know what kind of questions it asks. And of course, it's a written test as opposed to an actual lab. But again, I'm just trying to show you where these things are. Unfortunately, I couldn't tell you in what capacity it's going to ask you. These are things that you would want to know to meet the objectives so that you can say, as you're reviewing and studying for the exam, you can look at these items and check them off and say, okay, yeah, I know where this is. I know how to do that. I've done this. Anyone who's taken the test, you know, would know in what capacity you'd need to know that stuff. I couldn't advise on that. Let's see. So configure syslog. How would you do that? That would be here. Sorry, the problem is it signs you account after a while. So I believe that's here. Oh, and while we're there, same thing, download tech support logs. You would do that here. So yeah, generate NSX Manager tech support logs. Backup and recover. Okay, so in order to back up and recover, again, it's very similar to vShield Manager. You do that right through the Manager appliance itself, not through the web client. Well, I'll show you that in a second. So identify remote backup destinations. In this case, your option is FTP and secure FTP. I'll show you my configuration in a second. Explain how to back up and recover various components. Again, if you've done vShield Manager, it's just like that. And in addition to running a backup on the fly, you can schedule them to run at certain intervals. Export and restore vSphere distributed switch configuration. I'll show you that. That's in the web client. Import and export service composer profiles. I'll show you how to do that. And perform NSX Manager backup and restore. I mean, that's kind of the same thing as the top, but I guess it's just saying to run one. So first here, you'd point to an FTP or an SFTP server. I hope I can get to it. This thing's in the way. All right. So mine's already configured, but if you're going to designate a backup location, you'd click change, put in the thing there, the FTP, the port number, the user that has credentials, where it's going to go on that server. And I actually stood up an FTP server for this purpose. Any file name prefix you want to give it, a passphrase if it's secure. And that sets up and then you'll see it appear here. Then you can set up your schedule. I'm telling mine to run every day at 11:55 p.m. And as you can see, scheduling is on. And you can say to exclude either audit logs, system events, or flow records. For my case, I'm just letting it collect everything. And if you look at the history here, you can see the last several. And you can see it's run every night. And that's how you would set up the backup job itself. So if you want to back up, if I were to click the button backup right here, you would run a backup right now at the moment. And again, if you want to restore, you'd click a particular instance and click restore, and it'll bring you back to whatever the settings were at the time of that backup. That's pretty straightforward. Okay, so that's all of those. Let's do Service Composer Profiles. And that would be back in the web client. Here's Service Composer. Bear with me, it's been a while since I've used this. I think it's here. Yep, export configuration. And you give it a name, description, and a prefix, let's say SC-. In this case, I only have the one security policy. Actually, yeah, I'll give you guys a little background. I was setting up and playing with this lab to prepare for my VCIX, so there's certain components that I set up and enabled and then tore down. So some of the functionality of my lab might be broken at the moment, but ignore that, pretend it worked, then I'd finish, and then I'd be able to export the config. That's how that process would work. Now the other thing was to export and restore the configuration of a distributed virtual switch. And this is functionality that was introduced in the web client. So if you go to the traditional client here, you'll see that I'm pretty sure that, yeah, you do not have an option to do that. Yep. So you go to the web client, you go to networking. And so let's say that this is the distributed virtual switch that I wanted to pull the configuration from. I go to all vCenter actions and export the configuration. And you can either just pull the distributed switch or all the port groups. So it has been exported. Do I want to save it? Yes, I do. Let's create a new folder. And there's my backup. And just like I've exported it, I can also restore from a configuration. So same thing, all these interactions, restore configuration, and it would put it back. And that is objective 8.6. So sorry I rushed through everything. I just wanted to make sure that within an hour I was able to hit upon everything. If anyone has any questions, let me know and I can go into something in more detail.
At the moment, no. There's no questions coming in. How did you, out of curiosity, on a slight tangent, how did you find the VCIX exam? I've heard mixed reports about it.
let's see. So I guess I'll compare them. Now, like I said, I didn't take the VCP-NV, so I don't know what that's like. But I would imagine, like a regular VCP, they're probably going to ask multiple choice questions like, in a scenario where you back up, what are your options? Can you, I don't know, like put on a share, FTP, whatever. So I think it's important to look at the console so that if they ask you a question based on that, you'll be able to say, yeah, I mean, I based on being in the console, I can tell if the question is right or wrong, whatever. So that's where it's going to help you. The VCIX is very similar to for those of you who've taken the VCAP DCA. It's a hands-on exam where they give you a whole list of tasks and you have to perform them in a certain amount of time. And it's either a build or a modify task where you have to build something from scratch or fix something that's broken or that kind of thing. It's, how would I put it? I mean, actually, when I first took the DCA, I had trouble with it because it's really about time management. You have to look at the tasks they're asking you, and you got to figure out, in order to finish this on time, which one should I build and which ones do I need to configure after the fact. This was the same kind of thing. I would say if you're in the NSX console a lot, you know your way around, and you're familiar with the concepts of networking and how NSX works, you'll be okay. What these exams really tend to focus on is not just can I do the tasks, but can I do them quickly? So when I took the VCIX, and luckily I only took it once and I passed, and I'll be honest, I was kind of surprised I passed. The first thing I sat down was, to be fair, the lab performance for the first 20 minutes was not very good, and I had to kind of wait for it to kick in. And I noticed pretty quickly that I started falling behind on time. So for most of the exam, I was kind of rushing just to keep up with it. That being said, I wouldn't think that anything they ask is particularly hard. It's really just spend a lot of time, know your way around the console, and just practice.
Yeah, that's kind of what I've heard from a few other people, particularly around the experience and the performance. But useful to know, certainly. Obviously, we're focused slightly more on the VCP here, but the VCIX is the logical next step for a lot of people who'd probably be considering this, I suppose.
Right. Yeah. Like I would say that in same thing with the VCAP DCA, they do give you guides. You actually are allowed. It's an open book exam. You're allowed to look through the guides if you stumble, because it's pretty hard to expect someone to memorize everything going into an exam. But the advice I would give people who have not attempted either one hands-on is that's not the place where you want to be. Like you don't want to learn something during an exam. You want to kind of go in there pretty cold. So not everyone has the resources or the luxury to have a home lab, but certainly if you can get your hands on a place where you can practice, you want to go over the tasks over and over and over again, so that when you sit down, you can perform them really, at will. And especially because sometimes the performance of the VMware labs are not ideal during a test. So, if you're moving through the screens and you're waiting for them to catch up because they're painting, you're going to lose time that way. So certainly you want to be able to go through the tasks as quickly as you can, and that's really like your best chance of success.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, we've still not got any questions in, so I'm going to probably say thank you very much indeed, Lawrence, for running through Objective 8 there. It's been very informative, and hopefully we'll have you back again sometime in the future. Hey, you never know. If we do a series on preparing for the VCIX, I'm sure you're a shoe-in for that.
Great, yeah, sure. I'd love to help.
Excellent. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Great. Thanks for having me.